So tell us, what's up in your community? Do you feel safe? Is crime a problem or a challenge wherever you live? Well, we're going to take a look today at crime in the greater Philadelphia area, especially the city of Philadelphia. It is really issue number one on Voice of Reason. Hi, everybody. I'm Larry Kane. Welcome to Voice of Reason. I have to tell you that it's really an honor and a pleasure, an opportunity to sit down with the police commissioner of Philadelphia. He's no longer a newcomer, worked for almost 30 years in the Chicago Police Department, 8 years, I believe, as chief of the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C. during 9/11, was head of the Chandra Levy investigation and everything after 9/11. Charles Ramsey has now been here, if you can believe this, time flies, for 4 years.
Yeah.
4 years, and getting head into your fifth year. You're in your fifth year. Came here from Washington. I would say you are what people would call a tough cop, with tremendous discipline. First police commissioner that I can remember that wore the uniform and not a suit, which impressed the troops. How are things after 4 years here? What do you think?
Well, I like it. I mean, we have our challenges, obviously. Philly is not exactly an easy town to police, but we've got a good department. We've got good support. I've got a great boss and the mayor. So, I mean, we're moving in the right direction. We've had a little bit of a setback last year in terms of some of our crime numbers, but we're moving forward.
I'll tell you what's really interesting. Crime was up 2%, Philadelphia, which is really not a lot. Homicides were up, but the driving force behind the overall increase in crime was burglary and theft,
right,
which we'll talk about in a minute. But for some reason, I don't know about you, you tell me how you view it. In the last couple of weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, and I've been, anchoring the news for years, and I see the news. I'm used to a lot of violent crime, but for some reason, the nature of the crimes, the violent crimes, in the last few weeks have been pretty startling. Is it the holiday season? Is it the economy? Is it just a wave of crime at this particular time of year?
I think it's mostly idiots with guns. I mean, I don't think there's anything more to it than that. We had a rough time at New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. We had a spate of shootings and homicides. Things calmed down a little bit, and then, of course, earlier this week, we had a very, very violent period of time where we had 7 murders that took place over a 2-day period. So that's what we've experienced so far. There's no real rhyme or reason for it other than just some people that are violent, they have access to handguns, and they aren't afraid to use them.
You say idiots with guns. It's kind of interesting. Are most of the homicides or murders which are murders in Philadelphia committed by people who know the other people that they're firing at?
There's some relationship. They may not know them well. There's some dispute. Oftentimes it's over an argument. Argument is the number one classification or motive for homicide in our city, and it has been since I've been here anyway. So there may be some knowledge of one another, not necessarily a close relationship, but it's just usually over nonsense.
So it's crimes of passion or emotion based on divisiveness.
Right, and the fact that many people don't know how to resolve disputes short of violence.
Now, how can you get rid? The idiots are one thing, okay, because there are people who are always jerks and not smart. That's life. But how do you get rid of those handguns on the streets of Philadelphia?
Well, that's going to be very challenging because the gun laws here in Pennsylvania are weak. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, but I think we have to really focus on people who would illegally use guns. If you get caught with a gun, there has to be very swift and very certain punishment. If you use a gun to commit a crime, in addition to whatever penalty you'd get for the robbery or whatever it may be, there has to be a stiff sentence attached to it just for being in possession of that gun. We've got to really crack down on the people that use guns.
Now, when you go out in the community, and I want to talk about thefts and burglaries in a minute because they have the greatest impact on people, and you send a message to the community, the biggest victims of crime in Philadelphia, violent crime, seem to be in the regions where people are just, there's sort of a feeling of, get me out of this. I don't want to live in this environment. People want it to stop, don't they?
Well, I think most people want it to stop, and there's no question about that. I don't think they quite know how. But there's also a level of tolerance that I think is unacceptable in terms of crime, where people just seem to accept a certain amount of crime and violence as just a way of life, and it just should not be that way. We don't have people coming in from other cities to commit crime in Philadelphia. These are Philadelphians that are doing this to one another. You know, it's in North Philly and West Philly. Very little takes place between different parts of our city. People know who the folks are that are out here committing crime, yet it's difficult to get information.
Now, you say it's difficult to get information. The snitch business, the concept of getting people to talk, and accepting it as a way of life, what you call the level of tolerance. How does a police commissioner or a mayor change that over a period of time?
You have to keep chipping away at it. And not everybody is tolerant of crime, but there's a significant number of people that will accept it. There's a feeling, I think, that, well, if it's not right in my neighborhood, it's over there. But violence can touch anybody at any given time. So it's in everybody's best interest for us all to work together to try to end the violence. And certainly the no snitching culture, which really isn't all that new, it's just been given a name, in some communities is a huge problem.
What about parents and young people? I'm not talking about parents of 35 or 40-year-olds. I'm talking about parents of teenagers who might get a hold of a handgun, commit a crime, flash mobs, which we've talked about before. Are parents, and you can't categorize or label a whole city, okay?
Right.
There are good people and there are people who are not responsible. But are parents generally doing their job?
Most parents do their job, but there is a significant number of parents that don't. They don't pay attention to what their kids are doing. They don't, for whatever reason, make sure that they're going to school, that they're in before curfew. Sometimes it's just the little things that can keep your kids out of trouble. I mean, there has to be more accountability. But having said that, kids have to be responsible for themselves. If you're 13, 14, 15 years old, you know you should be going to school. You know you shouldn't be cutting class. You know you should be in before curfew. You know you shouldn't be engaging in flash mob activity. You know, so you have to have some responsibility yourself, too.
Now, when you talk about responsibility, how do you coordinate? How many police officers do you have right now?
Well, right now we're at about 60. We're authorized almost 6,700. We're down a bit from that.
So it's a little bit higher than it was a couple of years ago, but not as high as it was historically in Philadelphia.
It's actually a little lower than it was a couple of years ago when I took over. Yeah.
Okay, so 6,700. I remember the days when we had 9,000, 8 or 9,000, I believe.
8,000, 8,100,
yeah.
I think.
How much do numbers impact on the level of violent crime?
Well, there's no question, in my opinion, that police officers matter and make a difference. But like everyone else, the budget crisis has hit the police department like it has everywhere else and everyone else. The mayor's done, I think, a very good job of trying to minimize the impact on the police department. However, there has been an impact. Now, that doesn't mean that we're the only solution to the problem, because we're not. But the number of people that you have available for duty is a real issue.
So you need more. Can you get more?
Well, I mean, we've got to use what we have the best we can. So I can sit and cry about, do I need more, whatever. It is what it is. There's just, the money's just not there. And that's okay. Part of our problem isn't just in the numbers in terms of hiring. We have a significant number of people that are unavailable for duty because they're out sick, injured, suspended, some in the military. That impacts us as well. We start each day about 9% down in terms of people available for assignment.
That's almost 10% of the police department is not available.
Over 600.
Now, in terms of the relationship between you and the individual officer, how would you rate it?
Well, I mean, I would hope it's pretty good, but I mean, I'm not trying to be elected to anything. I'm not trying to run a popularity contest. I just want people to do their jobs and do it well. I want to make sure that this department is seen as being professional, one of the best in the country. I think we are, but I also think that we've got a few issues that we've got to get resolved.
Like what?
Well, I mean, we had a series of officers that have been arrested and been charged criminally for misconduct. We still have an issue in some of our communities with a lot of tension between police and community, the way in which officers speak to people, the way they treat them in a disrespectful manner. I mean, we've got to stop all that. We've got to be able to provide quality service across the board in every single one of our neighborhoods. And if we do that, then we establish ourselves as an organization where people can rely on, people can trust, and people feel comfortable talking to us.
Also, if you have a strong police department, you generally have a stronger community where people feel more comfortable about moving about, the freedom of motion and all that.
Well, it does everything. I mean, because business can't thrive if it's in an environment where people don't feel safe. You aren't going to get people to move into the city. It's going to have an impact on quality of schools because, you know, people are not going to be afraid to use the public school system if they think the public schools are safe and a place where a kid can get an education. So it really has an impact on everything.
Tough question for you. It would have been a tougher question if you just arrived, but you've been here 4 years now. Do we have too many police departments? And I'm not talking about the suburbs. We have a schools police. Okay, we have a transit police. We have a federal police. We have the Port Authority police. I don't know. One time I think I counted up 13 or 14 different police entities in the Philadelphia area. Should these merge?
I think we should look at some merger or regionalization in some regards in terms of police forces. When you look at policing in the United States, there are almost 18,000 different law enforcement agencies in the United States. That's a lot. And I think if you look at Camden County, for an example, and what they're moving toward with regionalization, in many instances that is the right way to go. I think it's worth looking at. I think that the economy is what it is. I don't think it'll ever go back to a point where you can have an 8,000 person force in Philadelphia. I just don't think that's reasonable. So I think we need to look at our resources. How can we best utilize them? If that means some merger or consolidation, then so be it.
Now, let's talk a little bit about thefts, burglaries, crimes that you think are the most aggravating to the people of Philadelphia. Even though we have murders, which are the ultimate tragedy, I believe that burglaries and thefts and petty robberies are impacting people more than anything else.
Our biggest problem in 2011, and so far this year, it's continued to be our biggest problem, is burglary. There's no question about it. Now, a lot of the media focus amongst certain people in the community is violent crime, and rightfully so. I'm not trying to minimize that. But violent crime does not impact everyone in every neighborhood. But practically every neighborhood in our city was impacted by theft, auto theft, burglary, property crime. We went up almost 14% in burglaries last year, and so far we're continuing to trend upward. We've had a meeting just today, as a matter of fact, focusing on burglary and getting people who are committing these crimes off the street because they commit multiple crimes. They don't do it once and retire. They hit house after house after house.
So basically what you're saying is that even though you read a headline about a triple death, triple homicide or this or that or pizza delivery man or whatever is going on, that you're saying that those crimes are the ones that people feel the most in their everyday lives.
Yeah, property crimes. Now, homicides, it is a tragedy. Shootings are tragedy, and I'm not trying to minimize that at all. But the crimes that really drive your numbers, you started off by saying we were up a couple percentage points in crime. It's driven by property crime, and you mentioned that, and you're absolutely right. It wasn't violent crime, it was property crime. It was really driving the numbers. There was a point in my career early on when I was a young cop that I always thought violent crime was the only thing that really mattered. Didn't pay much attention to property crime until my parents' home was burglarized when we were living in Chicago. It was the house I grew up in. It bothered them so much that they wound up moving to a Chicago suburb because they just could not be in that house because they never felt safe again in that house. So it has a tremendous impact on us, psychologically as well as just the monetary loss.
We'll be back with Commissioner Ramsey to talk about what you can do individually to battle crime and some reflections about the places he's been compared to the place he's in now. After this, on Voice of Reason. Back at Voice of Reason here on the Comcast Network, we have with us Charles Ramsey, Police Commissioner of Philadelphia for the last 4 years, now entering his 5th year. Good run, and certainly a person who's been transfixed into the Philadelphia scene. How do you compare this community? I'm just curious for the people who live here with Washington or Chicago, the two places where you've done most of your work.
Easier to compare Philadelphia to Chicago than to Washington, D.C. because there's so heavy a federal presence in Washington, D.C. That it does make it a unique position to police in, or at least be a police chief in. The crime is the same. I mean, auto theft, burglary, robbery, homicide, and the like. But there's a tremendous amount of involvement at the federal level. In Chicago, You have neighborhoods. You've got very similar issues here in Philadelphia. I mean, the two cities are very much alike, just on a smaller scale here in Philly.
I was kind of surprised and enlightened a bit on the way the Occupy protest was handled. We didn't have the craziness here that happened. There was small escalations, but for the most part, it was handled. Some people would say, who work downtown, with too much care. I felt that, having been downtown a lot during that time, that it was handled just with the right touch. Did you have a plan?
We had a plan, and quite frankly, our Civil Affairs Unit, which is a group of plainclothes police officers that handle demonstrations on a regular basis, they know how to interact with people just at the right level, set the right tone. I think we started off on the right foot. People have a right to protest. They have a right to express their opinion, but at the same time, other people have a right to get to work without being interrupted. People have a right to have their meetings. I mean, you have all these different dynamics going on at the same time, and our job is to see to it that everyone can enjoy that at the same time.
But the Occupy protesters never complained too much about the police department here, for the most part. They really, maybe toward the end, but we had a few of them on the air here. And they really sort of, I don't know, they sort of cherished the kind of relationship they had with the police department.
I think we had a good relationship, and I hope it continues in the future. I think it'll be back in the spring when the weather breaks, and we look forward to it. I mean, I don't see that we're going to have any real problems or issues. When we're not the story as an organization, to me, that's success. It should be about the issues that they feel are important. Not the police department, and that's really what we set out to do.
How important is presence? During the Occupy protest, I happened to be driving through, and I was crossing Logan Circle, or as some people say here, Logan Square, and I saw on the roundabout there were a lot of police cars.
Yeah.
You were holding them in abeyance. You weren't putting them in front of the protesters. This was intentional, right?
It was intentional. That was one of our staging areas, close enough to move quickly if we needed to, but far enough away where we weren't intimidating anyone. And sometimes your presence can have a negative impact when it comes to things like that. We tried to minimize the uniformed presence, but as they moved, if they wanted to march or whatever, we could block traffic, we could escort them, we could do the things we needed to do to keep everybody safe.
When you were in Washington, you were there during 9/11. You were there for massive protest of every kind.
Yep.
I mean, if you had the issue, the protest was there. Pro-life, pro-choice, protest, Million Man March, and you were considered very tough. Some people criticized the fact that you were maybe too tough. Do you have any regrets about that?
Well, I mean, we handled a lot of demonstrations when I was in Washington, D.C. They average about 3,000 a year. Most are very small, but they also have a lot of major protests. Most we handle very well. There was one in particular that we didn't handle very well, but you learn from that.
Which one was that?
That was the Pershing Park is what it's referred to as. In 2002, we made a mass arrest, but we did not give the warnings properly. We didn't properly clear the park before that. We've acknowledged that. We've admitted it. And there's still a lawsuit pending, but I think hopefully it gets resolved. But we messed up on that one. But you learn from that sort of thing. But the one thing that I've never done is disrespect people's right to protest. People have a right to protest. If it weren't for protests in the 1960s, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you as police commissioners. So I respect that.
Well, we had the 2000 Republican convention here. I think it was Chief Timoney was on the bike, and there were some anarchists there. And they were very, very difficult. I'm sure you've dealt with them.
Oh, yeah.
But, international money activists and anarchists. And they were arrested summarily because they wouldn't move. That's appropriate, isn't it?
Well, sometimes you have to do what you have to do. Now, most people come to protest peacefully, but you have to always remember peaceful and lawful are two different things. So there are times when people can be peaceful and still be unlawful, sitting in the middle of the street, blocking traffic, things of that nature. There are also people that come to a protest that have no interest in the issue at all. They just want to cause disruption, property damage.
Raise hell.
And exactly. And you have to deal with that group too, but you can't paint everybody with the same brush. So each situation is different. You try to make the best judgment you can, and you try to really avoid arrest if at all possible.
Now let's get back to what people can do to fight crime. And certainly you don't want vigilantes, but you do like Town Watch. You like Town Watch programs?
I do. Like
community-oriented policing.
PAL,
the Police Athletic League, which is
Yes.
enormously successful, has continued to be successful. What can individuals do? What's the federal expression now? If you see something, say something.
Yeah.
Does that go to petty crime and violent crime as well?
It goes to all crime, and preventing crime is a lot easier than trying to deal with it after the fact. I mean, whatever that may be. Trying to prevent it is always better. Burglary, for an example. We can send people out and we can do a security check, whether it's a business or residence, and make recommendations as to how you can better protect yourself against burglary. A lot of the thefts we have, believe it or not, car theft, you'd be surprised at the number of people that leave keys in their cars and leave the door unlocked. Leave a laptop laying on the seat or a GPS system on the dashboard, and they wind up with someone breaking a window and stealing. So there are things that people can do to make it a little more difficult for thieves, because they go for the easy target. They want to get in and get out very, very quickly. And there are things that you can do to better protect yourself. So prevention has to be a big part of it.
Talk about burglars. Do most burglars, from your experience, want to go into an occupied house?
Most real burglars don't want to go into an occupied house. I mean, they don't want any confrontation. They want to break in, they want to steal something that they can pawn very easily, and they want to get out of it.
So keep lights on.
Keep lights, put them on timers. But neighbors watching out for neighbors. Leave a car parked in the driveway. If you're going to take a vacation, instead of driving to the airport, take a cab. Leave your car out in the driveway so it's visible. I mean, you know, don't let your mail delivery pile up in front. Newspaper delivery.
Yep.
Things like that where it looks like you're not at home. You know, you got to pay attention to those things, and it doesn't matter what neighborhood you're in. Some of the wealthier and more affluent neighborhoods are the ones that really suffer the most from burglary, because they're the ones that people feel like they can go in a house and actually get something out of. So, you know, you have to just be aware and be vigilant.
Okay, if you had one thing to say to parents who are watching this program, and by the way, we have a lot of suburban viewers as well, so I guess it relates everywhere. And there's no absence of violent crime by young people in the suburbs. In fact, it's on the increase, tragically and sadly, mostly with alcohol related. What would you say to the parents?
Pay attention to what your kids are doing. Don't get caught up in this, well, you know, I don't want to snoop. You better snoop. You better pay attention to what they're doing. If they're texting, if they got a Facebook page, if they won't let you see it, that's because something's not right that's on it. You need to pay attention to what they're doing. They are children. They don't always understand the consequences of what they're doing. The triple homicide we had started as an altercation in a school, escalated into a back and forth on Facebook. Now we got 3 teenagers dead, and for what? You know, I mean, this kind of stuff can be avoided. I just saw something the other day where a woman in Indiana had her kid out there wearing a sign or something because he was dealing drugs or whatever, and I was asked that question. Well, I'd rather have him out there wearing a sign than buying a teddy bear to strap to a tree later when they wind up being a homicide victim. Pay attention to what your kids are doing.
And there's such a tendency for people watching this program, people not watching, friends, relatives, grandchildren, grandparents, to say, well, it could never happen in my house. And in the internet age, it can.
Oh, it can happen. I mean, whether it's a sexual predator, whether there's some cyberbullying, no matter what it is, you have to pay attention to what they're doing. They are children. They're not adults. When they are adults and they get kids, I guarantee you they will do the same thing in terms of trying to watch theirs. Okay? I mean, you have to do what you have to do to keep them safe, and it's our responsibility to do that.
Now, guns themselves are not the only weapons for killings. Right. England allegedly bans guns, although there's a lot of them in England, but they still have a lot of killings in other ways. When somebody notices somebody getting really hostile or angry, or as you say, escalation, what do you do?
Back away, back down. I mean, don't get into the back and forth. I mean, really, try to avoid it at all costs, because it is just absolutely not worth it. And we've got people now that, I mean, we've had homicides where, you know, I don't like the way you looked at me, you bumped into me. I mean, it's just nonsense. And it escalates into something more serious.
But sometimes people are reluctant. This is a tremendous trait in America, to call the police when they have suspicions. They're afraid of profiling. They're afraid of this or that. Is it better to take the risk of calling the police if you suspect something, even if it's nothing?
It's not a risk. Let us determine whether or not it's something or not. I mean, call 911. That's what you do.
People are reluctant sometimes.
Well, but then, you know, if it turns out bad, you've got to live with that. The fact that something was about to occur, your instincts told you that you should take action, and usually follow your instincts. If it doesn't look right, if it doesn't feel right, odds are it's not right. Follow your instincts. Let us determine whether or not it's something that we need to get involved in.
Is this town going to be your career, you think?
Well, I'm 61 years old, which is not old. I still love it. I feel like I'm in my prime right now, quite frankly. But I love Philadelphia. I made a conscious choice to stay here as opposed to going back to my hometown. So, yeah, I've got a lot more work to do here.
Commissioner, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Charles Ramsey, the Police Commissioner of the City of Philadelphia. Good advice, by the way, for people in the city and anywhere you live. This has been Voice of Reason. Thanks for being with us. Have a great week.